Welcome to Smart Manufacturing Mindset, where we explore the strategies, technologies, and leadership perspectives driving the future of manufacturing. This season, we're diving deep into the gritty details of what must be true for smart manufacturing success, covering key topics like organizational design, the role of technology partners, developing trust, change management, modern architectures, and skill development. Smart manufacturing is a journey, a team sport, and success requires every stakeholder working together to drive real transformation. This is Smart Manufacturing Mindset. Let's dive in.
Well, hello, I'm Jeff Winter, Smart Manufacturing Advisor to CESMII, and your host for Season 2 of the Smart Manufacturing Mindset podcast. And if you're tuning in, you probably already know that having a smart manufacturing mindset is more than just about technology. It's about rethinking the way that we approach manufacturing altogether, challenging the old ways of doing things and pushing past the acronyms and the buzzwords and uncovering the real truths that drive real value for people in the industry. And this season, don't worry, we're shaking things up a little bit. So rather than your typical roundtable style discussions where everyone's on a live panel together, I've decided to take a different approach. So I actually have conducted individual interviews ahead of time, asking each guest essentially the same set of questions. And this way I get to sift through their answers. I get to analyze them. I get to pull out the most compelling insights. And then in the podcast, I get to take you through the highlights, drawing connections and spotlighting differences and breaking down the themes that emerge and sharing my favorite clips. So this format allows us to dig deeper and uncover patterns and really understand the nuances of how industry leaders think about the future of manufacturing. And our guests this season include top voices from the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council and other influential leaders across the industry. So buckle up because season 2 of Smart Manufacturing Mindset is here and we're going to have fun. And our first episode that we're going over is we're going to start with the topic of leadership. Why? Because leadership isn't just a job title. It's the foundation of every transformation in manufacturing. The best technology, the best strategy, and even the best talent won't get you far without strong leadership steering the ship. It's about setting the vision. It's about making tough calls. It's about building trust and ultimately inspiring change in an industry that, doesn't always embrace change very easily. And leadership's the difference between companies that adapt and thrive and those that get left behind. And interestingly enough, according to a study conducted by Helion in December 2023, researchers analyzed the top 10 barriers to Industry 4.0 implementation using a process called Total Imperative Structural Modeling, or TISM. And basically what that does, it evaluates the relationships and influence between different topics. In this case, it's obstacles. And what they found is that while challenges like IT infrastructure and training and cybersecurity are significant, the single most critical barrier is a lack of top management commitment. And this reinforces what many of us have been suspecting all along, that successful digital transformation isn't just about technology. It's about leadership. And if executives aren't fully invested, the entire initiative struggles, making leadership the true linchpin of Industry 4.0 success. So what about leadership are we going to talk about? Crafting and selling the vision, overcoming resistance, executing transformation, and sustaining the change. Today, we're going to hear from Tony Huffman, Matt Townsend, and Craig Sutton, 3 people that I know and consider strong leaders in smart manufacturing, each with distinct backgrounds and different roles and approaches to digital transformation. So Tony Huffman is the newly appointed Vice President of Manufacturing IT at Georgia Pacific and was previously the Industry 4.0 Enterprise Architect Strategist at Koch Industries, which is Georgia Pacific's parent company. He spent over 2 decades in manufacturing with experience in everything from aerospace and defense to medical devices. But his expertise lies in bridging operational excellence with technology, leading a multi-year digital transformation at Molex, another Koch subsidiary, that improved productivity by 40 to 60% and reduced the cost of poor quality by 30 to 40%. He was instrumental in deploying an industrial data fabric and MES systems and AI-driven capabilities across 30 of Molex's largest facilities, earning both the Molex CEO Award in 2022 and the Manufacturing Leadership Council Award in 2024. We also have Matt Townsend, the Vice President of Digital Transformation at Medtronic, where he's responsible for building and optimizing the company's digital manufacturing and data infrastructure across 67 global sites. And with a hands-on background in shop floor leadership and engineering, he specializes in solving business problems through data and digital transformation. And he's spearheaded Medtronic's LiveLink, which is the name for their real-time asset performance management network. And it's a project that's covering 40 sites and something like over 4,000 assets. And it is enabling scalable productivity improvements year over year over year. And his credibility is reinforced by winning the Ignition Firebrand Award in 2018, the Fluke Reliability Engineer of the Year Award in 2017, as well as leading an enterprise architecture that was benchmarked among the top 5% in the world by Inductive Automation's CTO. And last, we have Craig Sutton, the Vice President of Industry 4.0 at Eaton. And he sits at the corporate level and drives Eaton's digital strategy across 200 global manufacturing plants. And unlike Tony and Matt, he operates primarily through influence rather than direct execution, focusing on governance and strategy and scaling digital initiative across Eaton's electrical and industrial sectors. But before joining Eaton, he spent over 20 years at John Deere, where he developed and presented the company's smart connected factory strategy to its board, an initiative that remains in place today. And he's been recognized as a top 30 manufacturing influencer by CESMII and serves on the advisory boards of MXD and CESMII, reinforcing his thought leadership in the industry. So as you can tell, we have three awesome people to hear from. But despite their different roles and approaches, all three leaders share a common commitment for driving large-scale transformation and understand that successful digital initiatives require more than just technology. They demand cultural and organizational change. And they've each encountered various different forms of resistance at different levels along the way and addressed it in different ways. Now, as we get started, one of the questions I end up asking later on in the interviews is one I actually should have probably started with. And so I'm going to start with it here now. And that is, how do you define smart manufacturing? Let's hear their answers, starting with Tony first.
Yeah, smart manufacturing is an important term for myself as well as our operating companies. I think a lot of organizations don't spend enough time to clearly define those operating definitions. And those really matter because they define your scope and your investment and really help cast your vision and make sure that everybody's connected on it. For me, I look at it from a hierarchy. So at the lowest layer, you've got smart assets. So these are asset-driven initiatives to take IIoT sensors, information, contextualize it to get to a higher state of maturity and performance for those assets. You're using predictive, prescriptive, and over time, you can get to kind of autonomous operations, lights out. That's the smallest scope within this concept of Industry 4.0, and we do a lot around that across our co-operating companies, and I'd say are pretty mature in that space. The next layer up is smart factories. So this is not only smart assets, but how the orchestration of all these various roles, whether it be quality, scheduling, engineering, and maintenance, how everybody comes together to improve flow through that factory and to optimize that flow. And if there's an abnormal state, how do you become normal in a self-healing manner using data and automation to really drive the most efficient value chain as possible? If you just focus on smart assets, you could be doing it to the detriment of the entire value stream, and you're not really enabling the flow of material and information to become more optimized. So that's smart factory, and we have many factories. And so the next layer above is Industry 4.0, which is not only that smart factory, but it's ecosystem across all of your factories and the supply chain hubs and the product lifecycle development. All of that is within the Industry 4.0 scope. So we think of it from that hierarchy so that we're clear on definitions and we know what scope we're actually talking through.
Now, how about Matt's definition?
My definition of smart manufacturing is very different than most. I came off the floor. I came up through shop floor leadership. I came up through building my own equipment, worked my way through the head of engineering. And so my definition of smart manufacturing, which is what we have on our floor today, is the vision that was built by a person who came from the floor and used that data for his everyday job or her everyday job. And so what I mean by that is my definition of smart manufacturing is the ability to provide data from the floor in such a way that it will improve our process. And so one of the visions that we had is we have to have a good process before we can digitize it. That is the most key fundamental factor in any kind of leadership and or vision in terms of digital, is if you try to build a strategy on top of something that doesn't have a defined and finite process that's working, it will fail. And so the smart manufacturing itself is something that will benefit not only in terms of asset performance. How do we take data coming piece from a shop floor and provide insight back to whether it's a maintenance person, shop floor individual, operator running the piece of equipment, all the way through to, the newest of the new, where AI is running on top. So for example, in our closed loop control, where we're making decisions to make offsets and changes in the shop floor with our CNC equipment in order to make, products better, stronger, faster. So nutshell, smart manufacturing is taking insights from the shop floor in order to deliver information to the person that needs it as quick as possible to make a decision that will benefit the site.
And lastly, how about Craig's answer? And while he was at John Deere, this was actually a part of his job, was to define smart manufacturing for the company.
So I think that whenever we look at smart manufacturing, we look at the aspect of using elements of data or technology to drive implementation and financial cost savings. And when we really look at smart manufacturing, we've talked about things like how do we connect data, how do we digitize our solutions and our applications, and how do we optimize those elements of your operations using intelligence to do it.
As you can tell, just by these three definitions, smart manufacturing doesn't mean the same thing universally. All three emphasize that smart manufacturing isn't just about technology, a theme you're going to hear over and over again, but it's about how technology enhances business performance and operations. They each stress the importance of data-driven decision-making and how digital tools must provide clear value rather than being adopted just for the sake of innovation. But Tony takes a structured, hierarchical approach. Matt takes a tactical approach, focusing on practical execution, and Craig takes a strategic approach. And this highlights a key takeaway. Smart manufacturing isn't just one thing. It's a layered transformation that looks different depending on where you sit in the organization. And you need answers for all of those layers. Every successful transformation starts with a vision, but a vision alone isn't enough. The real challenge is getting everyone from executives all the way down to the frontline workers, not just to hear it, but to truly understand it, to believe it, and to take ownership of it. So how do you craft a compelling vision and get buy-in at every level? Let's hear from Tony, Matt, and Craig as how they tackled this challenge in their own organizations. So Craig had a unique challenge of building Eaton's Industry 4.0 strategy from the ground up. And unlike Tony and Matt, who were executing transformation within an existing framework, Craig had to define what smart manufacturing meant for Eaton and then sell that vision across 200 plants worldwide. Listen for how he structured his approach, not just in defining the vision, but in making it something that executives and plant leaders could buy into.
Fundamentally, that was all brought on my responsibility. As I had mentioned in our discussion, it was a newly created position inside of Eaton where they had brought forward, they wanted to really accelerate our digital implementation in manufacturing. So there wasn't a playbook in place already. It was kind of high level goals about we've seen some success in a handful of plants. We like what we've seen in a few plants, but we also have a lot of differences in our plants. And so how can we scale that out? So it was asked for me to kind of develop this all from the, really kind of the ground up, using a little bit of knowledge of some successes that we had, but how does it translate? So I actually went through and kind of developed an entire, strategy roadmap with elements of our vision that we wanted to have, being the vision about how we would do it, from a technology standpoint, how you would do it with a partnering strategy, how we would do it from a skills development standpoint, and really in the end, how would the vision translate to a competitive advantage using digital in what we do. That whole aspect that we went through, we also laid out 5 key areas that we wanted to focus in on that would develop and deliver on that vision. So we knew that we had to ensure we had strong governance approaches, that we had strong processes that we need to implement, develop, integrate with our existing processes. We had a skills development area that we wanted to focus in on, a tech stack that was the 4th element that we had. And then the 5th area, which was a little bit maybe unique in what Eaton was because we're so large, is how would we scale out? How would we make this not just, one site being successful and then start over with the 2nd site or 3rd site? Like, how would you actually put this at scale? So that's how we approached it.
Now, Tony had a different challenge. So instead of crafting a vision from scratch, he had to take an existing vision and get executive leadership fully aligned to it. Notice how he didn't just present a vision. He actively educated leaders, took them to sites, and used real-world examples to make the vision tangible. Let's hear Tony's take.
Yeah, so we had Coke talk about there's a difference between sharing a vision and having a shared vision. So making sure that all of those executive leadership sponsors and stakeholders are bought in and they have a sense for what good looks like. My role specifically started with just education, so understanding what the transformation looks like. I mean, we had an internal team of people that knew their disciplines but didn't really have a strong operational background, and so understanding how technology enables operating systems and ways of working, the people, process, data, and tech of these transformations took some time. So what I did specifically was take those leaders out to several lighthouse facilities. We partnered pretty closely with a vendor that had some lighthouse facilities that we could go and see and be able to really understand in our industry how could this turn out to be and what were the results and the path and journey to get there. We also spent time at consortiums. So there's a few down in Chicago that we leverage to be able to understand how the lighthouse can be built and what those key enablers and capabilities are needed for us to be successful, for us to not only evolve manufacturing, but supply chain and product development alongside those. We did also have a third party come in, and they did a great job of helping not only describe the vision and where to go, but drill down into capability maturity models to understand where we at from current desired states, what's the bet associated with those, and how do we prioritize and roll something out at a massive scale.
Now, Matt took yet another approach, rooting the vision directly into Medtronic's core business priorities. So instead of making digital transformation about technology, he made it about delivery, safety, productivity, and quality, while he ensured that leadership saw it as a business necessity, not an IT project. And as you listen, consider this. Does your vision connect to what actually matters for your organization?
So Medtronic's vision on smart manufacturing started as a pilot in Galway before I had joined the team. And then what we did was we had taken that proof of concept, which was a very local scale, not in a global reach, in a small section. So as the leader of our group, I turned around and put that into our digital strategy and built our digital strategy. And so the digital strategy itself is fundamentally built on 3 segments. 1 is performance, 2 is asset intelligence, and 3 is our execution system. And so from there, used our what's the right word? use the ideologies behind what we do: delivery, safety, productivity, quality. And then how do we use those core fundamentals on the shop floor in order to build the digital framework that can make us win in those areas across our entire network. Then not only does that include data collection, that includes how do we visualize that to the point of we can use it, and how do we have output on that in order to drive programmatic savings as well as our continual productivity improvements, both for quality and safety for the shop floor. So the vision can't be a shiny object. The vision has to be tactical in order to solve a problem. So again, I stepped off of what are our core values inside the shop floor and how do we supply a strategy to feed into those key items. So whether it's delivery, safety, productivity, quality, it doesn't really matter. Each individual KPI that we have in each group, we need to supply coming from data from the floor. So how do I visualize that? How do I build our vision in order to supply that information for not only our shop floor leaders, but our executive leaders as it rolls up? And how do we determine, what's important and what's not? And how do we streamline the data that we collect from the floor in order to visualize it the right way?
What stands out here is that all three leaders understood that selling a vision isn't just about creating a grand idea. It's about meeting people where they are. But having a vision is one thing. Getting people to buy into it is another. But even with full alignment, a vision means nothing if it doesn't translate into action. And that's where execution comes in, turning strategy into reality, overcoming roadblocks, and ensuring transformation happens at scale. So, how do you actually implement digital transformation across an organization, especially when people may not want it? Once again, let's hear how Tony, Matt, and Craig approached execution at their own companies. Start with Tony again. So, one of the biggest mistakes companies make is treating digital transformation as a single project rather than a long-term journey. Tony understands that better than most. Tony didn't just implement a new system. He built a structured, phased approach while tackling resistance head on. He understood that you can't just transform. You also have to run the business and improve it along the way. Listen for how he balances these competing priorities, ensuring that transformation isn't just seen as a disruption, but as a necessary evolution.
Yeah, so it started with really evolving our Lean Six Sigma program, taking the capabilities that we built around variation reduction and cost improvement and building what's known as the operating system. So this is how do capabilities mature and then how do they get orchestrated in a way to improve flow and using data to make better decisions at a tiered level. So cell to area to site. It started there. Then we implemented and I led the effort to drive a whole new tech stack, an industrial data fabric, new manufacturing execution systems and shop floor connectivity. So big effort, big investment. And then from there, starting to do more advantage capabilities, advanced state analytics and connected worker solutions, more AI deployments. So it's kind of a three-staged approach. Resistance to change, you're going to run into it, and it's resistance to transformation. It's, a big initiative. You've got a lot of moving pieces, big investments in new capabilities, including new technologies. So people need to be brought along. You can't just force it into these scenarios, and typically what I find is that there's three layers that you need to focus on. So the lowest layer is the shop floor, the folks using the tools and getting things adopted. What I was able to do was really find out what that day in the life looks like and what the day in the life of the future is going to look like based on their pain points and opportunities, and to give them a sense for what that looks like. We've developed these short videos in multi-language that gave them a very personified view of how this transformation is going to help them day to day, make their lives easier, give them more tools and intelligence so that they can be more effective and efficient. And that went a long way just to really educate and get them connected to what this means for them specifically, what's in it for them. So we spent a lot of time with that. We also Spent a lot of time with those individuals in communications and getting them comfortable with the roadmaps and the timing and when things are going to impact and how they're going to impact. You don't want too much transformation at once for those users because there's only so much they can absorb. So you got to kind of stagger it and make sure that they've got what they need in each part of that phase journey. That to me is probably the easiest part of organizational change management. There are two other layers that I spent a lot of time with. The top layer is the executive team, and I talked about education and coaching, but there's also a getting them out and seeing it. So building a lighthouse, showing them what good looks like, bringing them to some benchmark organizations, allowing them to really connect the dots between those operational capabilities and the financials that they're signing up for, and then giving them a sense for how to get from A to B to C and what those processes look like, that it's not just going to happen overnight. That's a big part of the organizational change management and overcoming resistance. You're going to find a lot of people that want an immediate return. So you got to kind of educate on how this comes together and when are they going to start seeing those step changes in performance and how to measure and monitor that. So it's not just some separate initiative, it's part of your daily management and leadership standard work for those individuals. So I spent a lot of time with them, kind of coaching and getting them embedded into the operation so they can kind of see the shift in performance. And then the last and most challenging part, in my opinion, is that frozen middle. So I spent a lot of time with folks like site leaders to really understand how their role is changing and evolving from running a group and organization that keeps the lights on and fixes things to really talking about what does digital factory of the future look like, what tools and enablers do they need to start using, what does their leadership standard work start evolving towards, how do they get the right insights in the right people's hands, how do they start pulling away from the firefighting. We intend this transformation to drive what we call principled operations down to the lowest level, and so the problem solving is happening within the cell or within the area. Site leaders don't have to get involved anymore, so they can focus on more valuable transformational tasks. And so it's taking them along that journey as well, giving them a sense for how their role shows up differently, and helping them, create the right communications and really be the champion of this transformation. That's a big part of that, resistance to change that I see in that frozen middle layer.
One of the smartest ways to overcome resistance, though, isn't by forcing change. It's by making people want to be a part of it. Matt understood that digital transformation, just like Tony, isn't a project, but he saw it more as a movement. And like any movement, it needs a name, it needs an identity, and a purpose that people can really rally behind. But branding the initiative, that's what he did. And by doing that, he turned digital transformation from something abstract and intimidating into something recognizable and tangible. And as you listen, think about this. Are you just rolling out technology? Are you creating something that people want to be a part of?
Resistance is always there when you start. And it could be there in a couple of different ways. One is we're happy with the way we're doing things. We know that paper works. I don't want to learn anything new. And then the other people on the other side of the spectrum are, yeah, we'll take anything you got because it doesn't really matter. We'll just switch and change. So the most important part of everything that we've done is named our digitalization strategy. And so at Dana, we called it Dana Connected. It was everywhere. We put it on our shirts. We put it, we had all of our people who are working on the deployment teams wearing like a NASCAR shirt with it, with all the different parts of the ecosystem on the back. And it got to the point where when people were walking through the plan, we did it in a certain color that they knew that the Dana Connected team was on site and working on something new. So I brought that same flavor into Medtronic. We call it Live Link, and walked through the same journey and used the same examples, but took it one step more. We have Live Link stickers on every single asset. You're walking into a connected environment powered by Live Link on the doors of the clean room. It's become our culture and our fabric. And so it gets used just like when you go to the store and you say, hey, can I get a Coke? People are now using that language, at our tier meetings. This is, powered by LiveLink, on LiveLink, our LiveLink tier board, our LiveLink applications. And it's now ingrained in our everyday verbiage that it becomes part of your life. And as soon as it becomes part of your life, then those barriers just disappear.
But it's more than just that. What about the difference in running the business versus improving the business versus transforming the business? How do you balance those as you go through making a transformation?
How do we differentiate between run the business and sustain the business plus change the business? And so we work in an agile world. So as a leader, I rely on the product manager to ensure that we're doing the right thing for the right strategy going forward and the vision itself. How do we deploy? Where do we deploy? What things do we need to modify and or change? And so we work in a tiered environment where developers are working at tier 1, that works its way up to tier 2, which may be the Scrum Master, etc., moving all the way up to tier 4. So every week I get a full list of user stories, how we're managing, what we're doing, what's each individual going to succeed today, tomorrow, what are we going to have deployed in the next release in the next quarter, what is going to be a modification or a change to the existing application that we have and why. And then we work together as a team in order to have our business requirements listed, objectified, and released. And we do that in a very systematic, agile fashion where we have continuous efforts at our tier 1 through tier 4 levels to justify what we're doing each individual day.
But not everyone leading a transformation has direct control over execution. And that's where Craig's story is so powerful. He had to drive change across all these plans without owning the budget, the timeline, or the resources directly himself. This is leadership at its most challenging, getting people to move in the right direction when you're not the one pulling the levers. Listen for how he navigates execution through governance, executive sponsorship, and structured support rather than direct authority.
Yeah, so what we do with that, and I think it kind of depends, Jeff, as to who you're talking to whenever you're having this. If we're on the executive leadership teams and we're having those discussions, the way that we position and frame ourselves has to be in the fact that these elements of smart manufacturing are actually driving significant, we'll just say financial or elements of growth that we have in front of us, right? We're talking around how it changes the efficiency that we're doing on a mass scale, maybe how we're addressing significant labor challenges that we may be seeing on different aspects of the programs. So when we're at the executive level, that's kind of moving ourselves into connecting all of these elements of technologies, how they're driving elements of the high level metrics and strategy aspects. When we move ourselves more into a plant level, we actually frame the question a little bit different, because at that point, we know that plant managers have they probably have a different customer that they're dealing with. They're probably going to have a different manufacturing archetype that they have. And we start talking about how these aspects of smart manufacturing are a combination of technology aspects that serve use cases that tie into your KPIs that they have. And their KPIs may be in improving the efficiency of a certain work cell. It may be addressing a very specific element that they have around labor. And so although those questions might sound very similar from top level to the bottom, we actually frame our questions in a more structured way about how that technology will bring forth, or how smart manufacturing will bring forth and support their KPIs that they're being measured on a little bit more tactical level. From a governance structure, we set up where we grabbed executive leaders to come into it. They're actually various presidents that have P&L responsibility inside our organization to be executive sponsors. And what we put that in is we run a monthly governance call. And part of that governance call is the executive team being on board. And then also what we have inside our different divisions is a lead. And what we do is we bring that forward every month. We rotate through with our different members, and we talk about where we've had successes and also where we have challenges to achieve our goals. And The nice thing about that is it's not a traditional operations review where you may be presenting, maybe a green, yellow, red, and you're nervous about the red. Actually, we look at anybody who might have a red status on their operations chart, and we look across our division and we try and bring in maybe someone who has solved that problem in a different part of our company to help them move a red into a yellow or a green stage. So that's one thing that we do is we foster this approach to a monthly review with an executive leadership and then folks in the organization that have responsibility for bringing it forward. The second thing that we also have done, and that was governance, but this is around trying to get standardization around our technologies. What we recognized is technology was still not structured very well. And I say technology, and I'll use an example of automation, where we still saw maybe a plant going out who wanted to automate, and they would go out and start talking to different vendors. They would be talking to integrators. They would try to be solving it on their own. Maybe they didn't know there was a standard. Maybe we had a cyber policy that was coming forward. So what we actually did is we implemented a group of tech councils. So a technology council is centered around some of our core technology, automation being one of them, our digital factory being one of them, OT being one of them, additive, and so on and so on. And we would put in a technical lead. They would have not only business representation, IT representation, they also had, if necessary, supply chain for creating user agreements and master agreements with certain vendors. We also had cyber in the loop. And if necessary, we had legal that could come in to help ensure that we were framing together. So our other aspect is building together tech councils that could create standardization as well as we could to allow plants to just execute programs as opposed to maybe a plant or a team having to maybe develop a lot of the standardization that they thought was necessary.
What we've heard from Tony, Matt, and Craig is that execution and resistance to change are two sides of the same coin. The common thread? Transformation doesn't just happen because the technology is ready. It happens when people are ready. And the best leaders don't just implement change. They make it clear, they make it structured, and they embrace it at every level. But sustainability in smart manufacturing and digital transformation isn't just about keeping the technology running. It's about making sure that the mindset, the processes, and the improvements continue to evolve long after the initial implementation. Because a successful transformation isn't one that just worked. It's one that keeps working, keeps adapting, and keeps evolving and delivering value over time. And Tony, Matt, and Craig each had different approaches to making their transformation stick. But the common theme, success isn't a finish line. It's a continuous process. And one of the biggest risks in any transformation is treating it like a one and done project instead of an ongoing evolution. And Tony knew that sustaining success meant treating manufacturing transformation as a living, breathing part of daily operations, not something special or separate. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, so I see this in a lot of operating companies, internal and external, where we have this pilot purgatory or one-off use cases that have a difficult time sticking and scaling. We look at ways to embed those activities, the proofs of value, the pilots, into our operating system. So think of the hierarchy of technology enables capabilities, people, process, data, and tech, applied through an operating system. So think of Toyota Production System, Danaher Business System. Those are some good benchmarks out there to achieve excellence. That operating system will live forever. That's where you're going to apply these capabilities, define them, have capability ownership, single point of accountability in some cases, so that when you do evolve and get to a higher state of maturity, there's a team and organizational structure to keep those implemented, to make them a part of your operating system, so you don't slide back or you don't see it as the next flavor of the month. It becomes ingrained into how you operate through those operating system concepts. Engagement is a challenge because these are, again, long journeys, take multi-years. In some cases, some sites won't even see activity for a while. So you need to communicate appropriately when you're ready to deploy. And so spending a lot of time with the next wave sites and giving them a sense for what's coming, the readiness efforts to get to a state where they are able to adopt those better practices, and then get them the resources they need to be successful in their deployment. All of that, takes a good amount of communication, a good amount of when to communicate, and engagement. So you're pulling in multiple layers of that organization to really understand their role, their responsibilities, their expectations, the duration and the allocation, getting them trained and getting them the tools they need, showing them what good looks like. So if they're a wave 2 facility, bringing them to one of the earlier wave sites is a good way to get them aware of what their role is in this journey and what good looks like from a capability perspective, what the outcomes are going to be, that they're going to be held accountable towards. And so giving them enough information and the right time, so you don't want to communicate too soon. Otherwise, people will get engaged and then say, well, if this is 3 years out, I'm going to go back and do what I do in my current day job. So you want to try to find a good balance of when to communicate, how to communicate, and then getting them very clear on their roles, responsibilities, and expectations, ideally sharing some better practices that you've already established.
Like I said, sustaining success isn't just about keeping systems running. It's about making sure they continue to add value. And Matt's approach is all about turning data into action so that improvements don't just happen once, they keep happening. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, and phys load is something that is potential in terms of when we're working with products that may not be part of our everyday life. So again, kind of going back to the original process question, if we have our digital infrastructure, which is part of our everyday process, our standard operating process in a site, plus KPIs, and how do we use that in what we use as our MPS or Medtronic performance system? How do we ensure that digital footprint is part of our everyday network? That's the most important part of succeeding or sustaining. So there's a couple of things that go along with that. One is we need to ensure that we have a good overall process to maintain what we're doing in terms of ticketing, et cetera, to make sure that our overall, infrastructure is upright and moving the way it should be. And then two is adapting to different business requirements that come in while we're doing our everyday work and modify, adapt, change to our existing applications that we have, as well as new applications that may come along. As we move, for an example, from our automated visual inspection into more of an AI, which we're calling it AMI, how do we move from, our standard core, I'm looking for this, into something a little different where we're using a different bunch of techniques in order to try to make that go quicker, faster, stronger without having a defined, core person basically doing the coding. We're trying to do it a little bit more streamlined, and we're just continuing to move along and sustain what we have and adapt and change what we're going in the future.
But what I really liked is how we talked about keeping employees engaged throughout the process. Check it out.
In terms of how do we keep people engaged, and so as we've moved our data up into the tier system, and so what that means is tier 1 shop floor, and then work our way up to value stream at tier 3, site at tier 4. I met with one of the site leaders last week actually and talked about engagement and trying to get some real core values of what does that mean. And so he built what he called a cluster core team and engaged each of those individual leaders to be responsible for each of those items that are going on at the individual tiers. So whether it's a pitch tracker going on, did I win the hour down at the tier 1 level, all the way up to the total KPIs, did I win the day, did I win the month? And he's used that and taken their feedback and put it into a daily action tracker in order to keep these cluster teams empowered with an end-to-end tiered visibility with clear prioritization of what each individual is doing from the operator through to the site leader. And so that engagement was exceptionally good for me. And we're going to use that as a best in class.
Now, Matt emphasizes that sustaining success means making digital transformation part of the everyday workflow, ensuring that technology evolves alongside business needs rather than becoming static. Craig, on the flip side, though, focuses on building a culture of sustainability where transformation is embedded into the leadership, into hiring, and even peer learning. Let's hear how he ensures that digital initiatives don't just last, but continue to grow across the organization.
When we first came into this, and we would deploy a technology or maybe a solution, what we would see as a plant might take it and they might implement it. They may put it in one department, and quite honestly, it was easy for the team. I'll say the teams that were assisting that to kind of lift up, move on to the next place, and move on, as we continued. And what you would see, you'd circle back to that plant, and we had various levels of sustainment. Some plants did really well. Some you would see that the people who were there had moved on to new roles. Maybe you saw that it didn't spread the way you thought it was going to. It still stayed in one little aspect. So we actually retrenched a little bit on that. And that's where we started leaning into the idea of, some people will call it, a lighthouse. But what we looked at was, we looked at it as we called it a digital factory accelerator. So how do we accelerate in the aspect of digital factory? And we actually kind of flip the script. We start with culture in those. And when I say that is when we go in and we talk to plants and they're like, we want to be on this journey. We really focus most of our time on culture. Do you have this built into your entire leadership plant group? Do you have subject matter experts inside your plant? Not just one, but several of them. We'll even talk with people like, you'll go into the HR teams and talk to them about what are you doing in your hiring practices to bring in people with like inherent digital skill sets. So the culture we know had to be sustainable. The second thing then we would start doing is talk to them about how do we implement solutions which are scalable inside your plant, right? So we looked at aspects of what metrics they had and what use cases that they were trying to resolve. And then we talked about a portfolio of technologies that could solve those use cases or improve those KPIs. What we wanted to do was to create an organization, and these are at plant levels, that they could look at very sustainable KPIs, and also the aspect of an entire culture that was inside that plant who would say, this is how we do it in using real-time data. This is how we would address certain aspects that might need maybe 3D printing to kind of rapidly prototype something. So that's what we wanted to do from that. And then that other aspect of sustainability that we did as we matured plants into this, we asked a plant to either guide another plant or to go learn from other plants. And so we kind of wanted to create the element of teach and learn with them that we require them to do to continue to be accelerators.
No transformation is perfect, and each leader has learned valuable lessons along the way. So if you're leading a digital transformation or thinking about starting one, what should you know? What advice would you give to someone in their position? Let's hear what each of these guys had to say. Starting with Craig, let's hear how he navigates leading transformation initiatives when you might not be a technical expert on a subject.
I'm just going to use where we're moving with AI. And I say that from the fact that it's not that I don't know something about it. I will just tell you, it is moving so fast that I'm not sure how any one person can keep up with it. And I'm sure there's people out there that are doing it. But what I do look to leverage is what are those aspects of either an internal expert who may be in that space, or I may be looking at whether it be on the consulting side or maybe the technology providers who are trying to move at that pace too. So I just look at the fact that in leadership aspects, your role is not to be the smartest person in the room. Your role is to surround yourself with an incredible amount of balanced talent around you who can guide through where you're going, where it's going, what's the offsets of certain other elements of the business, and you kind of surround yourself to use them as the sounding boards. That are we moving fast enough? Are we moving too slow? Are we investing correctly? Are we shifting? Do we have the skills to lead us forward?
Now, Matt kind of builds on this idea, but more broadly by emphasizing that leading transformation also requires a culture of transparency where mistakes aren't hidden from, but uses opportunities to learn and improve.
Most important quality is transparency. So in order to lead this digital journey, you have to be transparent on not only your vision and your expectations. If we try to do something too quick, try to solve a problem that we know we potentially can't solve, we will fail. Everybody talks about pilot purgatory and all these kind of other things that can go wrong. Don't be afraid to be wrong. I've made a ton of mistakes in my career. But when we make mistakes, we learn from them. And so we end up not being able to do that. And we end up learning what we should do. We end up learning what we should not do. And so how do we take those small and or mid-size proof of concept, proof of value, don't call them pilots, and take that and build that into what could be a large score, scalable, infrastructure change, or it could be a POC that may not have worked quite right. My largest and one of the biggest wins that I ever had in a machine learning project, we ended up trying to solve for this something over here, and then we ended up having some data that showed something different, and that changed the way we worked at Dana. It was an unbelievable project, and it started off going one way and ended up another. And you never know, I guess, the way the outcome's going to be. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And the most important thing is don't let anybody tell you it can't be done, because it can be.
And if transparency builds trust, then an open mindset fuels progress. While Matt focused on the power of learning from mistakes, Tony highlights why adaptability and alignment across teams are crucial for lasting transformation. Engineers talk one language and IT talks another, and leadership has an entirely different perspective. So as you listen to Tony's answer, think about how having an open mindset and an ability to translate between different functions can be the key to getting everyone moving in the same direction.
Yeah, I think if you want to really jump into the transformation space, it takes a open mindset. So looking at things from a ability to benchmark to understand what good looks like. We have this internally mental model framed up where you ask the question: is this new to Georgia Pacific? Is it new to Coke? Is it new to industry? New to world? You should be challenging yourself to understand the industry. I think education is a big part of that. Just getting a good network and understanding where the industry is and where it's going. What's hype versus what's actually out there that you can implement, and getting a sense for how to then take that knowledge and adopt it into your operation. It's not good enough just to be an SME. You have to be able to find frameworks and mechanisms to go and adopt it. So the more you educate yourself on good ways of strategy execution, better practices around deployment, the more successful you're going to be in actually driving the results and the outcomes that most people can talk about. You also need to be bilingual. So what I mean by that is understanding the language of operations and the language of technology. Being well versed in both and how they come together is going to make you pretty successful. There's a lot of people that know one side of the equation and not very many that can speak both languages and really understand how the two can be brought in a capability lens to really shift the needle and drive that transformational step change in performance, not just a pointed use case or solution. So don't be tech first. Don't just go out and find a vendor and try to deploy something. Really think of it from the language of operations, language of technology. How can these things come together to become a step change in how you operate, the new ways of working? So understanding both sides is important. I would say then communication at all levels is important. You're going to have to sell at the executive level, get people educated and bought in at the global leadership team level, the C-suite level, and that's going to require a different level of communication, more financial based, more understanding strategy and how this aligns or it becomes a strategy over time. And at the lowest level, you're going to have to communicate to folks on the shop floor that have been there 30 plus years that say this is the ways of working. This is why I do what I do, and I'm not interested in something new or modern. And so being able to meet them where they're at, help educate on the day and the life, really listen first. So come in with humility and get respect and empathy for how people operate and the pain points, so that you can communicate appropriately and bring them along the journey so that it's not feeling like you're throwing out new tools, but you're actually helping enable a better state for those individuals. So I think communication's a piece of it. And then just good discipline, leadership standard work, using frameworks, using tools. Don't just talk about things, but go about methodologies to get things from innovation to solutioning to scale. Like you've got to be able to execute against that.
Across more than 3 hours of interviews, Tony, Matt, and Craig shared their insights on what it truly takes to lead a digital transformation in smart manufacturing. And while we've highlighted some of the best moments here, the full conversations explored even more how to overcome resistance and how to inspire teams at every level and how to make transformation feel like an opportunity rather than a disruption. But despite their different backgrounds and leadership styles, one theme was consistent. Leading transformation isn't about pushing technology. It's about pulling people in. This means technology doesn't drive transformation. Leaders do. The most successful leaders don't just set strategy. They create an environment where people feel invested, where they understand the why, and where they see transformation as something they're part of, not something being done to them. Each leader approached that challenge in a different way. Craig led without direct authority, proving that great leadership isn't about control, but about creating the right conditions for success. Tony focused on execution, ensuring transformation was structured, scalable, and balanced with business realities. And Matt took a unique approach. He didn't just lead a transformation, he branded it. He understood that digital initiatives need an identity that people can rally behind and make them feel like they're a part of something bigger than just another corporate project. And his approach highlights a powerful lesson. People don't engage with abstract strategies, but they do connect with stories, names, and shared missions. And so their experiences prove that leadership in transformation isn't about having the perfect strategy or the latest technology. It's about guiding people through uncertainty, creating clarity where there's confusion, and empowering teams to take ownership of change. Leadership in smart manufacturing isn't about deploying technology. I've said that over and over again. It's about uniting people behind a shared vision and making change stick. That's what separates true transformation from just another project. So once again, I'm your host, Jeff Winter, and I appreciate you joining me for this conversation. Stay tuned for future episodes as we tackle the biggest challenges shaping the future of smart manufacturing and challenge the way you think so that you have the right mindset. See you next time.